there's a huge space of micro prediction markets that could actually be like all kinds of really powerful mechanisms. The question is like, can you even make community nodes appear faster? And I think like the default challenge here, right, is like democratic mechanisms are slow. One kind of personality trait that I think becomes more important in this era is agency, right? Like just it's like the willingness to get off your butt and do something. Someone, I think, in Hong Kong lost 25 million because someone impersonated a bunch of people, including the CEO or the CFO on a video call. There definitely are artificial languages that have Easter eggs in them. So basically the meme is, how do you pronounce GHOTI?
Okay.
It's pronounced fish. So in Klingon, the word for fish actually is goatee.
Really?
Yes.
Wow, that's hilarious. Hey everyone, this is Sina with another episode of Into the Bytecode. My guest today is Vitalik Buterin, the creator of Ethereum. His second time on the podcast after joining me for the very first episode with Carl Flourish. So in this conversation, we talked about a whole bunch of things, including micro prediction markets and how they can be used for content moderation, how the world is becoming a more complex place with more powerful forces that interact with each other, and how we can understand what's happening, AI as a technology and its many ramifications, brain-computer interfaces, and we even got into some linguistics and how you can say the word fish in Klingon. I really enjoyed this, and I hope you do too. And with that, I'll leave you to it. Into the Bytecode is sponsored by Optimism. The Optimism Collective is building the open source modular software project known as the OP Stack, which allows developers to run layer 2 blockchains, while also addressing key governance and economic challenges in the wider ecosystem. Optimism is also leading decentralized grants experiments, like retroactive public goods funding, which recently granted 10 million OP to projects across developer tooling, infrastructure, and education. More recently, they had a major milestone by adding Coinbase's blockchain Base to also be governed by Optimism governance, and also contribute a portion of their sequencer revenues back to the collective. I've known the Optimism team for many years and know that they're dedicated to both scaling Ethereum and extending its ability to build better economic structures. So, if you're interested in learning more, whether you want to build something new or you want to apply for grant funding, then I encourage you to check out Optimism at optimism.io. I thought I would start with a line that you had in one of your recent blog posts, that prediction markets are the holy grail epistemic technology, and that you felt this for some time. So yeah, what do you mean by that?
So the way that I think a lot of people naturally think about prediction markets is they think about people betting on major events and large numbers of people betting on a relatively small number of events over a fairly large time scale, right? So you might be betting on the outcome of a sports game, you might be betting on the outcome of an election, you might be betting on whether or not LK99 is real. And like these are all, like good prediction market use cases. I mean, the sports betting I think is like just like a fun thing, but sometimes you need the fun things to create the network effect for the super socially valuable things. But like Robin Hanson, for example, for a long time supported futarchy, where you'd have a market where for example, you'd simultaneously trade a company's shares conditional on if they hire this person as a CEO versus if they hire this other person as a CEO, and then you'd see which shares float higher, and then you'd use that in order to decide who to hire the CEO, and then you could imagine like that process even just being automated, and that would just be futarchy as a direct form of governance.
Yeah.
So like those kinds of ideas are like how we traditionally think about prediction markets, right? But I
Maybe
think,
taking a quick tangent on this idea of futarchy because it's so sci-fi and cool. Has it been experimented with anywhere?
I'm trying to think. I mean, I feel like the answer is not really because in order to even have those kinds of prediction markets, like you want to get the basics working first, right? It's like conditional prediction markets that feed directly to decisions are stage 2. Prediction markets working at all at scale are stage 1. Um, but yeah, no, it's interesting that like it's like you call the space kind of science fiction, and to me I'm kind of sort of quickly running through this whole thing as though it's old news.
Yeah, it's like no big deal. Well, yeah, you're
Yeah,
right.
but
First you need to
it
run. First
is.
you need to walk, then you need to run. But it does make me think, especially, it would almost be cool to have. Yeah, I mean, we can talk about prediction markets, but even the idea of futarchy, almost playing with it in more low stakes environments of like, say, an individual deciding what they're going to do next and kind of doing it as a choose your own adventure type thing where people are betting on the different paths. I don't know, but we digress.
Right. So this is where we get to actually not a digression at all. Like my core case for why I think prediction markets are a much larger category than what people have been thinking, which is that there is a huge space of micro prediction markets that could actually be like all kinds of really powerful mechanisms, right? So I could give one example. Let's take community notes on Twitter, right? Like very powerful mechanism. I wrote a blog post on it. Like anyone can suggest a note for a tweet, and then there's this voting mechanism where people vote on notes, and it's not even selecting the most popular note. It's selecting notes that are consistently popular for people from like both sides of like major political divides, and it's sort of a really nice, and I think people generally agree that it's nice. But the main criticism of it that I've seen is basically that these notes do not appear fast enough, right? It's like some random explosion happens, and someone makes a tweet saying, look at these 3 pixels over here. The blue party did it. And it turns out that that's total fake news, and like within a couple of days, that was like actually the purple party that did it. But like in the meantime,
It's always
it's
the
like
purple party, isn't it?
it is, yeah. You know, but during those 2 days, it's like the meme spreads, and people have like some like very preformed opinions on the situation. And the question is like, can you even make community nodes appear faster? And I think like the default challenge here, right, is like democratic mechanisms are slow, right? Like elections are slow. Like it takes a long time for lots of people to look at something, especially if people are less sophisticated. Like you don't want to press people to try to decide anything quickly. So one natural idea that comes up is like, well, what if you just have a prediction market on whether or not some post is going to have a note that either if it's going to have a note at all, or if it's going to have a note that has like some particular set of contents, right? And then the idea is basically that you're essentially introducing a second kind of voting, and except that kind of voting is kind of incentivized in the sense that like you get rewarded if your immediate vote matches the final outcome, and you get penalized if your immediate vote goes against the final outcome. And so over time, that would basically kind of concentrate voting power in the hands of people that are actually good at approximating the final outcome. So that's like one example of a potential micro prediction market use case. I've talked about this, I think, a couple of times in the context of like moderation and social for like decentralized social media sites. Basically the idea would be that like you have some like DAO that's like some final panel of judges, and like there could be some inefficient thing of like 15 or like 100 people or whatever, but then you have kind of prediction markets leading up to that, or like some kind of challenge game leading up to that, right? Where like basically, like you can like go and flag something, but then if you're flagging either goes against the final decision, or it just goes against too many other people's later flags, and no one else is supporting you, and you give up, then like you get penalized. But then if it goes along with the final decision, then it gets rewarded, right? And yeah, like
That's
to me,
super
these are
interesting.
all like these are all prediction market use cases, right? There's even ones within the crypto space, like is this URL a scam, right? Like that's like the simplest thing that would benefit a massive number of people, right? Like when a scam starts, like I think there was like a pretty fun one this morning where someone actually managed to make like 30 seconds of like deep fake audio and video of myself, which is like eventually I was able to like points to specific things that show that it's not me, but I could totally see how someone who's only heard me like 2 or 3 times would totally not catch on to that. And it started spreading around, and it was like one of those fake Starkware airdrops. And like the challenge with these things is that like, even if they get community noted in like 12 hours, like lots can happen within those 12 hours. Yeah, exactly. So like it's that exact same kind of use case, right? So like those are just ways in which like micro prediction markets just like map onto huge numbers of functions that would be like really valuable for us in terms of like preventing scams, preventing misinformation, giving people faster access to higher quality information, and like all of these things that we really care about.
Do you think this is possible to build today, or do you see any edge cases or pieces of this idea that kind of have to be fleshed out more?
I think, the idea is kind of just like there for the taking. The thing that's not built as like basically one, like actual user interfaces and like actually building up the ecosystem of people actually participating in these kinds of things. Or I think realistically in a lot of micro use cases, it won't even be people, it would be AIs participating in these things. Like there's some interesting experiments happening there, right? So Martin Koppelman, I think, has been doing a lot of stuff around like AIs participating in Omen. And that was actually one of the things that I linked to in my latest blog post. And the other piece, of course, is that blockchains have to be scalable enough, right? And I think this has just been the kind of big deal breaker that's prevented a lot of super interesting blockchain applications from happening for such an insanely long time, right? This was also when I talked about in like my other post on making Ethereum cypherpunk again, right? Basically, my thesis that the reason why the degen stuff dominates so much is because when transaction fees go up to like $80, then like a degen thing is the only thing that makes sense to build. But fees go down to like 0.8 cents, then like suddenly all of the cool stuff just starts totally making sense again. Basically I think 2023 and 2024 were just like on this arc of making massive progress on layer 2 scaling. We saw Arbitrum hit stage 1 last year, and lots of rollups are planning to hit stage 1 or stage 2 this year. So I'm excited about us like actually turning the corner on that.
For sure. It's a whole new space of applications that's possible. So maybe one kind of interesting prompt is that 2024 is also an interesting year because it's a year of elections, right? Not only in the US, but elsewhere in the world. Taiwan just had their election, India's having theirs. And, if the last kind of election cycle is any kind of example on this, it's going to be total chaos in the online information environment that we live in, right? And this time around, the big difference is that AI has matured to the point where you can have very kind of closely resembling audio or video of someone to the point where it's hard to tell who they are. So it's kind of interesting that this is also coinciding with this time that crypto also has this opportunity with layer twos to build new things. I do wonder if kind of decentralized social networks as a whole also have a role to play, given the fact that there's, you know, a public key infrastructure baked into it that's legible to everyone on the outside.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a couple of things that all have synergies with each other, right? So decentralized social networks, absolutely. Like, I think it's also been amazing to see like how much Farcaster has been taking off. Also, I mean, like how Lens has been doing recently as well. It's like amazing that we're starting to see a crypto application that people actually use, right? And that is not just something finance related. Like, it's something that I think people have wanted for a really long time. But it's like actually happening, and like it's interesting. You can see, like people on Twitter, like sometimes even having a hard time comprehending it because like when I commented on Farcaster yesterday, some people were replying things like, "Oh wow, Vitalik says, like Farcaster is the narrative. Does this mean I need to buy degen tokens? Like." Like what's the? It's like the immediate interface to the narrative is like, okay, like how do I align my bag with the thing? And
Right.
Of course that's like not the whole point, right? The point of Farcaster is like it's a social network. You use it and you post on it, and you yell at people on it, hopefully nicely. But
I saw Dan reply to some folks who were saying "when token" on Farcaster and saying that if you say this, you're gonna get nerfed and like deprioritized by the algorithm. And it's kind of a good way, I feel, that they can be the benevolent dictator right now and kind of set good cultural norms.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see if the culture actually manages to stick like 2 or 4 years in the future.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you were
but,
saying there's a few things that come together.
Right. So we talked about micro prediction markets, talked about decentralized social, and I feel like I've kind of talked about the micro prediction use cases within decentralized social already. It's interesting because these are things that people have been already experimenting with to some extent. Like there have been like ideas around crypto social networks where you can like make bets on like people's long form posts. Like I think even a bunch of the Chinese ones tried to do that like 5 years ago. But this could easily be one of those things that like doesn't succeed until it does. Then the third one is like all of the ZK identity stuff, right? So ZooPass, that also started at Zuzulu, and that whole ecosystem. And like ZooPass is increasingly growing into a fully fledged product. Yeah, so that's been good to see, and I mean I think the synergy there is like you have your like a crypto asset wallet, but then you also need your identity wallet that like stores things like attestations and any kinds of like claims about yourself that are off chain, and you can make proofs that go over a whole bunch of these different claims and that like prove some particular statement about you without revealing any other information. So yeah, there's like that's also really powerful, and that's something that like decentralized social networks could plug into. Another natural use case of this is airdrops, right? Because like the thing that every airdropper wants is they want to airdrop to like one, people who are actually part of their community, and two, people who are likely to like actually like hold on to and care about the token, and not just like dump it when they discover it 3 months later on like scrolling through like Rabby or whatever, right? So the idea here would be that like instead of doing like per address airdrops or like doing very proprietary kind of algorithms to try to like weed out like who
To
gets
obfuscate
in
what you're
versus
doing. Yeah.
exactly. It's like the proprietary algorithms that are like obviously justified by the need to like prevent a kind of like airdrop farming kind of abuse, but at the same time they're just like massive opportunities for the team or like any rogue employees to make massive hidden pre-mines. Yeah, so instead you airdrop to people who, let's say, have at least 5 zoo stamps in a particular category, right? Or you airdrop to people who, like attended DevConnect or attended Zuzulu or like have a Gitcoin passport score of at least 0.3 or whatever. And you do all this while preserving privacy. So I think that stuff is super interesting as well. And it feels like the technology is like slowly getting to the point where we're like right at the cusp of being able to do it. I'm actually really hoping to see some like zoo-gated airdrops start to happen because I do think that airdrops can be good at like like motivating people to like actually like learn and go through complicated stuff when other things don't, right? And so yeah, if we suddenly like educate a large number of people of like, oh, you have a zero-knowledge proof wallet now, wow, and then that's something that can start getting used in a whole bunch of other contexts. Yeah, so let's see. Yeah, we went through micro predictions. Also went through having a more decentralized alternative to USDT on Tron. Also went through Crypto Social. Also went through ZK. Enterprise applications, or like I guess the category here that I have in mind is like things that in today's world are done centralized, but where you could add like about 20% decentralization to them, and like that actually gives very useful guarantees to users, right? So actually, the easiest example of this to give is actually not even things in the traditional kind of categories that people have been exploring for 10 years, like healthcare or supply chain or whatever, but something that's very close to our hearts, which is proof of solvency for exchanges, right? Like if you're a crypto exchange, then you can like zero knowledge prove that your database is being updated correctly, and that you actually have an underlying coin for every coin of users' balances, right? Like
this is your blog post titled "How to Have Safe Sex."
Exactly. Yes.
Very
proof
memorable.
of being of not being FTX, proof of not being Mt. Gox. Yeah, I mean, I think the interesting thing is if you like analyze what it actually means to like do zk snark based proof of solvency, you realize that like it's actually technologically speaking basically the exact same thing as a Validium, right? It's a root hash on chain where the root hash is only allowed to be updated based on a zk snark that like satisfies certain rules. And I think like that's interesting, right? Because it shows that there like actually is a continuum there. So yeah, I think exchanges doing proof of solvency is number one. Number two is games. So we already saw the Dark Forest game, right, about a few years ago. Actually, yeah, one of the reasons why I really respect Brian Gu and his team is that, like, the critique that I gave yesterday of, like, some of the existing sort of, quote, social fi things, which is, like, a term that I totally hate, right? Because it's like, oh, like, okay, we have this amazing opportunity to do crypto social. Well, what's the social problem you want to solve in crypto? Well, gee, not enough speculation. But aside from, but the critique I gave is like, it's similar to GameFi, where the thing that fails is the game, like people use financial speculation as a substitute for fun. And like that's what I feel like. Like Axel Infinity and like a lot of the others basically ended up stumbling into doing. And people probably even thought that they were genuinely having fun while all of the tokens and everything was going up in 2021. But then when prices started going down, it just became a ghost town. And at least, I haven't dug into this in a lot of detail, but if that chart was correct, then I guess similar things happening with FriendStack. So basically, like you have to actually use the blockchain, but make sure that the game is fun in a way that's like not dependent on the token dynamics going in one direction. And the Dark Forest game from 2020 actually does a super amazing job of that, right? Like it's not a financialized game, but it is a blockchain game. And of course, the same guys did Frog Crypto at Dev Connect, which I think was also similar and actually fun game in the same spirit. Yeah, so like blockchain games where like you have on-chain proofs of state, and that makes it easy for you to like provably export assets from one server, potentially import them to another server, and do really interesting things there. I really support that kind of thing. And then from there, you can start going into just like various business applications. At which point, I think the big like value unlock that people are looking for is that if you can make these ironclad proofs that like you have some kind of object in progress going through some kind of like enterprise system, like you could even like a package in transit, some product in the process of being manufactured or whatever, then like you could use that as collateral, and that could make it cheaper to take out loans, which I think is like super interesting too. And then, of course, finally, like fifth category is DAOs, and like we've been seeing a proliferation of DAOs, and I think people starting to get smarter and smarter on governance mechanisms. Wow, I think we just went through all 5 categories that I described in my other post of like what in the Ethereum application ecosystem excites me from like back in December 2022. So I think it's like, it's good to see that stuff has actually remained stable for a year, right?
Yeah.
Yeah,
That was a very comprehensive tour.
Yeah, it's just, but it's nice, right? It feels like it's the same kinds of things, but it's all of those things feel so much more mature.
Yeah, totally. We've made a lot of progress. So maybe taking the conversation one layer deeper and thinking about why these things actually matter ultimately. Why it's helpful to build these sorts of applications and mechanisms. And I found one concept that you've talked about recently, that the world is becoming more of a dense jungle, to be interesting. What do you mean by that?
Right, the dense jungle. I think the dense jungle was this metaphor first introduced it by Post actually all the way back at the end of 2020, where we talk about how there's all of these like social actors that are becoming more and more powerful, and in a world whose size is still staying the same. And so it feels like we're entering this environment where, remember like before, like 15 years ago in the US, and I think Canada too, the kind of
I'm
political
also Canadian,
debates.
for what it's worth.
Indeed.
Yeah.
Like basically, the political debate, I think, in both of those lands and actually probably the entire Anglosphere and Europe as well, was like one part of the spectrum was afraid of big government, and the other part of the spectrum was afraid of big business. And it feels like the outcome of that is that 15 years down the line, actually both of those are probably more powerful than they were 15 years ago. And like, I'm not saying that that's good, and I'm not even saying that that's a kind of non-terrifying, but like it feels like it's the reality, right? And like it feels like lots of other things are getting bigger at the same time too, right? Like mobs are getting more powerful. Even like cryptography is also getting more powerful. AI is also getting more powerful, right? And basically, the point that I made a few years ago was like, if your criterion of a good future is like a big thing that you dislike being beaten down or going away, then you probably feel like you've lost. But if your criterion for success was a new thing that you like being introduced, then like you probably feel like you've won, right? And I think this is even true in the cypherpunk space, right? Where like on the one hand, we definitely don't have crypto anarchy, but on the other hand, it's like we have amazing privacy-preserving technology. We have zero-knowledge proofs more powerful than most people could have even dreamed of. We actually have private keys in each person's hands on a massive scale. Look, we have all of these different things, right? And it's and so if you look at it from the perspective of like, well, what kinds of things did we gain? Like, well, it turns out, we actually gained a lot, right? And it's this paradoxical kind of situation where you just have like all of these really powerful forces that are simultaneously progressing and expanding themselves. And when that happens, then like what you basically have is you have these like really powerful things that are pushing up against each other more and more. And I feel like this like interplay dynamic between these different forces is going to be one of the defining trends of the 21st century.
So does this imply then to understand the world, whereas before you needed to understand maybe like a couple or a handful of big forces that were shaping the future, now you have to have a more cross-sectional perspective on things?
I think that's definitely, absolutely a big part of it. I think, you have to have a cross-sectional perspective on pretty much everything at this point.
Into the Bytecode is sponsored by Privy. One of the biggest problems we're grappling with as builders working on crypto-enabled applications is how to make the right trade-offs between user experience on the one hand and security and privacy on the other hand. How do we promote self-custody and ownership while letting the application shine rather than the crypto behind it? So Privy plays an important role here. They provide simple onboarding so anyone can connect to your app easily by allowing them to sign in with an existing wallet or by making it easy for you to provision a new self-custodial wallet for them, linking to social logins like Google, Twitter, or Discord. I personally have faith in Privy because of the team. Henry Stern, who's one of the co-founders, was previously on an episode of this podcast, so you can listen to that conversation for more of a deep dive. And he and his partner, Asta Lee, have been thinking about data privacy and security for a long, long time. And you can see this in the level of thought they're putting into the product. So if you're working on a new product and thinking about how to reach a wider group of users without compromising on either user experience or privacy and security, then I encourage you to check out Privy at privy.io. What to you are the big forces that are shaping the world right now? Like if someone was like, I have a some period of time and I want to get to a point where I understand what's happening, what would you recommend that they look into?
Like the big trends that are kind of guiding the world in general.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a few. So I think the big political mega trend is probably the collapse of a kind of a condition of relative peace that existed to a great extent probably in the 1990s and to a lesser extent since around 1945. And I think this is a kind of order that we've all basically taken for granted and kind of treated as being like permanent, and even treated the direction of it continuing to improve as being permanent. But over the last decade or so, we've basically seen it collapse. And I mean, I think there's a lot of different explanations for this, but I think like ultimately, like in any one of these orders is going to be finite because like the pressures that caused it to come into existence are no longer there. Lots of other aspects of the world are changing. The people who even remember the events that motivated the creation of the order are either retiring or dying out, and we're seeing an era of instability in all kinds of ways, right? Like both within individual countries and of course between countries as well, it feels like the environment is kind of getting more tense and more competitive and hostile in a lot of ways. And like one way to interpret this is to interpret this as some kind of malignant new thing, right? But the other way to interpret it is like, well, this is actually how history has been all along, and we're just exiting a period of like actually, like a relatively unusual amount of calm, which is actually the interpretation that I'm more sympathetic to. Then the second major trend is the rapid growth of technology, right? And I think like crypto is a big part of that. AI is absolutely a big part of that. Biotech is starting to be a big part of that. Also, like various kinds of hard tech, like solar panels, for example, right? Like it feels like we're finally on the we're on the cusp of this transition in climate change, right? Where like I feel like 20 years ago when technology was worse but political cooperation was better, there was a lot of idealism of like, oh, what if we could all agree to abandon the big cars and the big houses and live simpler lives for for the sake of our shared earth. And these days it's like, well, yeah, like even if all of the hippies do that, all of the non-hippies won't, and it turns out that the non-hippies alone are like enough to potentially cook the planet. And so it's and at the same time, like solar panels are getting to the point where they're like actually cheaper than like a lot of the non-renewables that like we hate for very good reasons. Like things like coal and so forth. And so like that's creating this perspective shift, right? Where like I think 20 years ago, the conversation was much more kind of climate as religion and like sort of personal like penance and like worry about your footprint and all of those things. And these days there's a larger share of the conversation that's on climate tech and like the amazing, really smart 19-year-olds from India that I met at the Emergent Venture Summit back in August that were like basically converting CO2 into bricks and like people developing amazing solar panels and developing batteries and so forth. So like that's I think one of those interesting examples where kind of the two forces go in the same direction. AI is, I think, AI is massively changing a lot of things, right? And I mean, I feel like it's having a couple of different effects. Like one of them, obviously, is that it's increasing the set of things that can be done with no human effort at all. But then the other thing that it's doing is that for the tasks where you still need some level of human involvement, it's expanding the scope of things that a human can do. It's also really changing and resetting the kind of expertise that you need. And like it's really, like I think, like changing around a lot of the kind of rankings of like what kinds of skills are important to have and what kinds of skills are less important to have. I could give a concrete example. So I've been using AIs to help me with programming a lot, right? And they're amazing, and there's a lot of things that they can help me code like 5 times faster. But the one place where AI is really noticeable in how helpful it is in like introducing me to new frameworks, right? So things that are not intellectually complicated, but where there's like specific systems that where you have to code in a particular way to interact with them, and where like many thousands of developers have done it before, but I just have no idea how, right? So like making a Chrome extension, for example, or like making an Android app, right? Like these are all things that just become vastly easier and just more accessible to people. And it's like in my power to just like go do it as a day project when that was totally not true before. The time that you spend programming, I think before, for me, programming was always 80% debugging, but now programming is like 95% debugging. And actually drawing is the same thing, right? So like I've used AI to draw a whole bunch, and if you want to draw with the objective of dazzling people, then you can generally put a prompt into Stable Diffusion or DALL-E or whatever and get it right on the first try, right? But if your job is to draw something specific that you need for some purpose, then generally you have to do like 10 rounds of like telling it to draw in a painting, telling it to edit a particular corner, telling it to make the cat 50% larger, telling it that like, no, the cat has 4 legs and not 5, and just like doing all kinds of, like multiple rounds of modifications. And yeah, so like the kind of work that's being done, it changes a lot. Also, I think it makes a lot of things more accessible, actually, right? Like, I think there was a fear for a while that like AI would, like empower the elites at the much more than it empowers like regular people. And in some ways, it actually kind of feels like the opposite is true, right? Actually, this is something that I think Noah Smith wrote about. I think I forget the name of the post, right? But it was something about like the age of the normies coming back or something. And his point is basically that like there's actually even like papers that show that AI's ability to increase people's productivity, like the percentage increase is significantly greater for amateurs than it is for experts, right? And like that's also the sort of thing that I noticed, right? It's like like it improved my ability to create like browser extensions by a factor of 5. But if you're like a browser extension expert, then it might improve it by a factor of like 1.1, right? So that's like interesting. And I think one of the interesting things is that one kind of personality trait that I think becomes more important in this era is agency, right? Like just it's like the willingness to get off your butt and do something. And like I think the way that a lot of people are going to fail is they're going to be in the mindset where like things feel closed off to them because that's like it's an area that they haven't even looked into before, and they expect that it's going to be super hard. But like they haven't even updated to the fact that like, well, no, with LLMs suddenly it's a lot less hard. And if you can just make that mental switch in your head, then your ability to operate in the new world is probably going to like increase quite significantly just from that alone. So
true.
Yeah. So those are just like random shifts that AI is making.
Yeah.
Another thing that I totally did not predict, and that I think nobody predicted, is how it's replacing the doctors before the plumbers, right? Like, or I guess like even a better analogy might be replacing the lawyers before the plumbers, right? Exactly. It's like the internet work gets replaced way before physical work, which is just like super crazy and interesting to see. I mean, I think from a kind of worrying about society perspective, I think that's like a massive, like good. Like it's okay, like this big scare that we had about, like the AI making the most vulnerable people unemployable is, like fortunately, like not happening for a while, and the people that AI hits first are the people that are in a better position to handle it. But like at the same time, eventually, AI is going to come for everything, and that's something that I think like we do really need to start being prepared for. So, and then the other big one, of course, is like how AI intersects with like topics like trust, right? So, like we talked earlier about deepfakes, right, and how. You can't trust someone's voice or someone's video anymore. And like there were some pretty serious cases of this too. Like I saw yesterday there was a report of someone, I think, in Hong Kong who lost 25 million because someone impersonated a bunch of people, including the CEO or the CFO, on a video call. And like I asked that to my security friends, and the security friends basically said, like, well, no, that's a really exceptional situation because there were just like multiple total OPSEC fails there that like any reasonable enterprise would have had multiple layers of protection against. But at the same time, right, like it shows how like people who have been slacking off on security and feeling safe slacking off, can't really slack off any longer. And at the same time, of course, this is where crypto might come in because we have many more of these kind of digital attestation-based technologies for figuring out what it is that we're actually trusting, right? So, so just like a lot of these interesting shifts that are happening from in all kinds of different sectors. I think right now, obviously, AI is pulling ahead, and it's probably something like half of the story, but like both crypto and hard tech and bio and all of these things matter a lot too. And the world is just going to continue like flipping itself over in interesting ways pretty much once a decade from here on all the way up until the singularity.
And when is the singularity?
So my 95% confidence interval is 2030 to 2200.
Okay, that's quite a wide range.
It is, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, actually, a year ago it was, I think, 2027 to 2200, but over the past year, AI progress actually has been significantly slower than I had been expecting, so I feel like I've adjusted, away the earlier side of my distribution somewhat. But yeah, I think it's just so hard to predict these things ahead of time, right? I can, give some example reasons of why we should think this, right? I think just going very far off kind of intuitively, right? Think about the difference between the ENIAC, right, the very first computer that came out in the late 1940s, and today, where we literally have computers embedded in watches, computers embedded in random $10 electronics, computers embedded everywhere. And then imagine that entire trend progressing another 70 years, right? Or think about AI progressing from where it was 30 years ago, where it was a joke, to where it is today. Where today, I think you can make a good case that modern AI is roughly as performant as AIs in science fiction, right? Like the computer on the Enterprise, or any one of these, science fiction robots or whatever, right? I actually think that that level of AI doesn't even feel unrealistic anymore, even given today's technology. It's also interesting to see how we've been wrong on the specifics, right? I was watching one of these science fiction movies, Passengers, about recently, and one of the scenes there that came to mind was there was this robot character, right, and basically a bartender, and I think one of the humans physically attacks the bartender, and the bartender just basically didn't mind it, right, and this is a pretty common sci-fi trope, right? That robots don't feel pain, and so you can go and punch them, slap them, kick them to the ground or whatever, and they just kind of emotionlessly, stand back up and bow before you and say, hope you're enjoying your day, without expressing any emotion, right? And that is totally not how ChatGPT works, right? If you put ChatGPT into that body and you slap it, it will say ow. Now, if you then remind it, hey, you are a robot, you do not feel pain, then yes, it will reply, oh, I'm sorry, I apologize, I am a robot and I do not feel pain. Sorry for the misunderstanding, right? But at first it feels the pain, right? We've just gotten lots of things wrong, and it's just
and how do we know anything about the experience of a conscious being, right? You can't see it on the inside, so that's right. You have nothing else to go on.
Indeed, and my usual reply to sort of excessive pessimism on that is that you can tell if an organism is conscious if it starts talking about consciousness, right? If aliens got to Earth and they started reading all of our philosophy and they noticed that we talk about this internal experience thing, then they will be pretty confident that we have internal experience. But the problem with robots is they've been trained on a friggin' multi-terabyte corpus of human-made data, and so if they start talking about internal experience, they'll just be pattern matching humans, right? So it's hard. But so back on timelines, right? It's one of the ways of thinking about this is if you think about what modern AI is, right? The way that I think about it is it's the set of algorithms that you create not by specifying them explicitly, but by stirring a computational soup and putting into that computational soup some kind of optimization pressure that pushes it toward creating things that are more and more like what you want over time, right? And then you just stir it for a really long time and you put in lots of compute. Now, what's interesting about this description is that this is also a perfectly valid description of the process that created humans, right? So it's like
a baby.
Exactly, or just like evolution, right? From the primordial soup, all the way up to like where we are today, and so it's like, on the one hand, that it's a sort of dismissive description of AI, but on the other hand, it's like I think. Like, if you want to have a dismissive description of AI that's fair, then your description has to be like similarly dismissive of humans, right? Because ultimately, humans are not magic, and we came about through this exact same kind of process, right? And I think here, it's it's the same thing. Like AI was created by a big computational soup. We were also created by a big computational soup. And then if you have that frame, you can ask the question of like, well, how big does the soup need to be to create something like humans? And there was this interesting article, I think it was like projecting TAI from computation or something. I forget what it was exactly called, but it basically tried to use both like a single human lifespan's worth of learning and the entire process of evolution as kind of like metaphors for like how much computation and AI would need to go through in training before we would just logically expect it to like be that smart. And this is like a very difficult thing to compute because it's just like a completely different regime and you have no idea like what parts are important and what parts are not important. But it gave answers that are like between about 10 to the 25 and about 10 to the 55, right? And 10 to the 25 are the AIs that we see today. And 10 to the 40 is where we might see computation closer to the end of this century becoming possible. And so by the end of the century, basically the idea is that it looks like we'll have enough compute that we'll be able to just like stir a soup in some pretty naive ways, and eventually someone will just like accidentally create something as complicated and intelligent as humans out the other end, right? So that's kind of my intuitive, like one of my intuitive bases for the anchor. And then I think the other intuitive basis is just kind of like this very rough like idea of asking like, well, think about the difference between modern AIs and the AIs of 20 years ago, and like what is the ratio between like time ratio between that and AIs that are actually smarter than humans at everything. And like that actually gives a more aggressive answer. Like I think if that was my only frame, I would say we'll get superhuman AI like before 2040. But then the other thing that we have to take into account is the fact that like the last few years of massive rapid growth, they didn't just come from improvements in algorithms. They came from a one-time transition from putting a little bit of our resources into algorithms and compute into putting like a significant fraction of all of humanity's resources into algorithms and compute, right? And like that's a transition that's not going to repeat itself. Basically there's like 20 different ways to look at the problem, and they all give all kinds of different answers. And I think my uncertainty over which frame is more correct than which other frame is itself the reason why my 95% confidence interval is so wide. Yeah, but my median I think is like around 2060 or like maybe like late 2050s or so. But things could totally go in all kinds of ways. But this is I think in a very real way the last and most important chapter of humanity, basically before like either doom or utopia comes. So it's going to be interesting.
Okay, maybe to close, maybe I'll have a couple fun rapid fire questions if you're up for it. Mm-hmm. So the first one is, we've talked about this future, and also for a long time you had in your bio this Nick Bostrom essay, the Fable of the Dragon Tyrant. So my first fun question is, how do you think, how long do you think either one of us will live? What does our longevity look like as people who are, in our 30s today?
I think My own prediction for like living to 1,000 years, let's say, is 50%, and I think keep in mind that this combines together both like anti-aging research on its own, progressing optimistically, and the possibility that we'll have an AI singularity pretty soon, and the I guess also a possibility of like cryonics, like rewaking us. Actually, though, I think if you take that into account, then probably maybe even go up to 55% or so. So yeah, pretty high.
Okay. Second question is, so in the post about thinking about the long-term future, you talked about brain-computer interfaces as one potential path for a good AI future. So how do you think about the state of BCIs today and the potential promises or dangers of that path?
Yeah, so I think I see like BCIs as a spectrum where the question is basically like how tight is the feedback loop between stuff happening inside a computer and stuff happening inside of your brain, right? And AIs are obviously pretty extreme on one end of the spectrum because you're basically putting in a prompt and you have to wait for it to do stuff for like an entire 30 seconds. And then, things like Auto GPT start going like even further to that extreme because you just like spin up an agent and it does whatever for hours. Then what stuff that we have today, I think, can easily get into hundreds of milliseconds ranges, right? Like there's definitely like starting to be, like even things like AI photo editing tools where like just with a keyboard and mouse, you can have like pretty rapid feedback in both directions. Then with the Apple Vision Pro that I know that a lot of people are talking about, right? Like it does eye tracking. And eye tracking, I think, I view it as being on the spectrum of like actually being BCI, right? Because, it is technically just, like watching your muscles, but like, like the eyes are definitely like closer connected to your brain and, like much more like subconscious even than, your hands and fingers and feet are. That, like already kind of reduces that feedback time even more. Then we have, like sort of non-invasive ways of reading what's like actual neuron firings inside the brain. And then, of course, there's actually the invasive stuff where you like put chips under the skull. And unfortunately, it does look like the invasive stuff is significantly more powerful. But like at this point, there's been some pretty impressive results, right? Like it feels like I think the latest is that with the top of the line best BCIs and with a trained subject, you can type from your brain at like 60 words per minute or something crazy like that. So like you're getting, like that's like about like half of, like I guess relatively expert typing speed. Then, what else is there? There's, again, I think like the holy grail is basically that like, you get an experience that feels like being able to like multiply 8-digit numbers in your head and then, like remember them exactly and being able to just like think of, like what is the population of Iqaluit and like be able to like actually get the answer just as easily as if you asked, yourself the question like which like which country I'm from, for example, right? Like, and
is that how you imagine the interface? Like I'll kind of ask, I'll have a question in my mind, and the same way that the answer comes today, that answer will come.
I mean, I think like it's gonna feel more like thought than like language eventually, right? Like there definitely is a kind of like subconscious way that people operate that can be even faster than language. But I think it's all going to start with language and then optimize from there. But like it does feel like our ability to do all of those things is increasing pretty rapidly. And of course, I think like to me, the final eventual goal is just mind uploading, right? Where like basically our actual brains end up like running on some digital substrate, and like that's amazing because I mean, I could give a couple of reasons why. I think it's actually like exciting in the super long term. I mean, one that I think people don't think about is that like that just solves physical safety, right? Because like if you're just streaming a backup of your mind like live, then if the blue party blows up a bomb right beside your server, like you just like restart somewhere else and like you almost don't even feel it, right? And so I think given how much like we worry about safety and even how many horrible things are justified in the name of safety, I think like just like that by itself is just like such a massive win. Another one is our ability to explore the stars. So there's a project that Mark Zuckerberg is like participating in, and some others. It's called Breakthrough Starshot, and their plan is literally to get to Alpha Centauri, like the star, for 4.3 light years away before the end of the century. And if you ask like how the hell can anyone do that, well, the answer is you have a space probe, like a robot, and it has a light sail, and you shine a laser at it, and the laser accelerates it at 10,000 Gs, which is literally 100 kilometers per second every second. And that's an acceleration that's like so rapid that like a human would just get squished immediately, but like robots, can handle it just fine, right? And then you accelerate to 20% the speed of light, and then you get to Alpha Centauri. So that's like our ability to just like do all kinds of things, like expands massively there, right? But like that's like far future stuff, right? Like I think in order to have the technology to like even start thinking about doing those kinds of things, like we need to have way better neuroscience than we do. We need to have a way better understanding of how our brains work, and like starting to just have like a stronger BCI industry is like probably one of the better ways of like actually helping to build up that expertise. And like the final goal here, right, I think is basically so that we don't get just like massively outcompeted by super intelligent AIs whenever they come, right? Like if you if the question is like, well, would you prefer a universe that's populated by things that can think a million times faster than us, but are human and like have memories of being human and of like being born in a particular like a city in a particular country in like 1991 versus a future where like totally like robots that are probably not even conscious populate the universe. Like like the first is just I think a much better deal from like the perspective of pretty much like almost any philosophy, right? So that's kind of part of how I think about like super long-term stuff, but like that's like that's all like singularity level, right? Like I think before that there's a long transition of like just like improving like like regular people's ability to interact with the environment and do work and do all those things in a way where the human is still like contributing the largest like share of the work and the output, instead of just being relegated to like more and more of a tiny role of like giving prompts to the AIs until eventually the AIs just decide to start writing the prompts themselves. So
Totally.
yeah, that's this is
It's a very exciting path. Okay, last question, and then we can call it. What is Lojban?
What is what?
Lojban?
Oh, Lojban. Oh,
Did I say that?
Lojban.
Did I
you mixed
mix
up
the order of the letters?
It's a Lojban. It's
that
this,
was my Lojban dyslexia coming through.
Yeah, no, it's just a really fun artificial language that people invented over the last half century. So it's kind of similar to Esperanto in that it's like people inventing a language, except the goal of this one is to basically have a like perfectly logical grammatical structure, right? So like so words can still have meanings that are like like vague and approximate and all that, because that's just something you can't get away from when you're like interacting with the real world. But like in the grammatical structure, like a computer program can parse, like what is the verb and what is the noun, or like the equivalents of those things, and like like what is referring to what and things like that. And the goal of this is to make it easier to like express very precise and clear ideas, and also potentially, like create a language that's easier to learn because it's kind of vocabulary and rules are more self-contained and self-consistent. Though I think Lojban itself actually doesn't do a super good job of that. I feel like Tokipona does a somewhat like a better job, though it's kind of weird in a totally different direction. But it's a fun language.
How do I say that? Mi pinche lo.
Mi pinche lo shrino chati.
Nice.
If
only we could change green tea to I like a Vitalik, though, with red wine in it as well.
Right. Oh, it's fun. Like there definitely are artificial languages that have Easter eggs in them. So I know one that's in Klingon. Okay, you know how there was this meme among like linguists that basically the meme is, how do you pronounce GHOTI?
Okay.
It's pronounced fish. Now, why is it pronounced fish? Because you take the GH from enough, you take the O from women, and you take the TI from nation, and you get fish. And like this is just like it's like a common in-joke among people who just like make fun of like English's totally bad and broken spelling system. So in Klingon, the word for fish actually is goatee.
Really?
Yes.
Wow, that's hilarious. Okay, well, on that profound note, I think we can bring it to a close. Thanks so much for taking the time. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you so much, Sina. It's been fun.
Hey, I'm going to make a small ask here. If you've been listening to these conversations and want to support what we're doing here, I would really, really appreciate if you could leave a rating and a review for the podcast wherever you're listening to it. This might seem like a small thing, but it will really help other people also discover the show. Thank you. I'm grateful to be able to do this and look forward to being here together again soon.